Hi there and welcome to another episode of Money Moves with Debt Rescue, the channel where we help you move your finances in the right direction. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about all things vehicle finance. We're going to give some tips, give some more information, and give some things that we need to look into before we purchase our vehicles. So what do we need to purchase a vehicle if we want to? What are the things we need to look out for? What different options do we have when it comes to purchasing vehicles? And finally, things that could potentially lead to us sitting in a position where we might be facing the possibility of losing our vehicle. We might need access to vehicle finance for various reasons, for personal ownership of a vehicle. And obviously there's a lot of things we need to look at when we specifically are looking at vehicle finance. The reality is it's virtually impossible to buy a vehicle cash. So vehicle finance is the one model in which we will need to look at how are we going to purchase that vehicle, looking at all the various factors of the cost of the vehicle, the interest rates, and so forth. According to the NCR's Consumer Credit Market Report, for Q1 of 2022, we saw vehicle finance in the region of 43 million Rand being granted, which equates to about 127,000 vehicles that were financed during that period specifically. The reality is we also know that almost 40% of South African consumers are over-indebted. So it's very important that part of our budget planning makes provision for the fact that we can actually afford this vehicle finance, as well as all the extras that come when ownership of vehicle takes place. When planning your purchase of a vehicle, it's important to know that a couple of things are going to be required of you. First and foremost is obviously affordability. You need to be able to afford that vehicle. And this is where we always refer back to that budget. We've done a couple of episodes in the past about budgeting. We'll place some links in the bottom on how you plan for it. The next one is your credit report. And we'll be doing a lot of discussions about that as well in the future. But understanding that the information on your credit report becomes very important when determining, after obviously seeing if you can afford it, what kind of interest rate you'll be granted. You'll also need a copy of your ID. You'll need to prove your residence in terms of where you stay. And of course, once you purchase this vehicle, you're going to need to make sure that the vehicle is insured. So some things on the checklist to keep in mind while busy with the planning. So talking specifically about vehicle finance as the tool in which you'll finance this vehicle, we need to understand that the things that are going to be looked at is, as we've now mentioned, your affordability and your ability to afford this vehicle. Part of this is also remembering that vehicle finance is generally one of your lower interest rate based methods of financing a vehicle. So here we have a variety of different vehicle financiers in South Africa, different credit providers offering obviously different products, and they will then usually do an assessment and see whether you can afford this vehicle and then grant you your vehicle finance loan in line with that. So when busy with the vehicle finance, obviously things that would be looked at is, are you trading in a vehicle as part of your deposit, or are you paying a deposit amount to reduce the amount that's going to be financed? Then you've also got to factor in, and we've done a video about this as well in the past, on balloon payments, understanding how balloon payments work, what the impact is on the long-term finance model that you are looking at. So please do factor that in as well, and please do have a look at our video where we discuss balloon payments. And probably one of the two biggest final things to look at is what interest rate you are granted, hence why generally you would apply with various institutions to see who would give you the best interest rate, and the repayment term. Look at the repayment term because obviously the longer the repayment term, the lower your installment would be monthly, but also factor in, do you really want to extend it for maybe 6 or 7 years when you are applying? So a couple of things to tick off and go through when you are busy looking at vehicle finance as the method in which to purchase your vehicle. Another method of financing a vehicle is through a personal loan. This is usually applied when the cost of the vehicle is lower, or if you are looking at an older model vehicle that might not be financed through your traditional vehicle financiers. Here it is important to remember that generally, because a personal loan is unsecured debt, you might also incur higher interest rates. Another option that consumers can look at is now the rent-to-own option. So this usually becomes applicable in the case where you don't know if you actually want to own a vehicle, you might have different plans in the future, and you want to rent it with the option of potentially becoming the owner in the future. Or alternatively, if perhaps your credit report is of such a nature that you can't right now finance through a traditional finance house, that you might look at going the rent-to-own option. Again, here the costs are quite a bit higher than traditional vehicle finance options, so definitely do your homework, because there are usually also second-hand vehicles, understanding the true cost and whether this is something that fits your specific life circumstances. And finally is the cash option. Now obviously this is restricted to somebody who might have the cash flow to purchase a vehicle outright cash, just making sure that, again, is the vehicle fit for purpose, and what does this do to your potential savings plan that you have for your future? There are quite a few things to consider if you're looking at financing a vehicle. First and foremost is definitely looking at the actual monthly cost. What are you going to be paying? Here, interest rate is a definite factor to consider. We've already in the year of 2022 seen a couple of interest rates increases already. So make sure that when you are provisioning this in your budget, that you factor in the possibility of changes in interest rates in the future. The second one is relating to obviously the cost of fuel. Obviously, we've also seen significant increases year on year since 2021 of almost 40% fuel price increases. So make sure that your budget, again, provisions for fluctuations in fuel prices. When you purchase a vehicle, there will be additional costs. Make sure that that is part of your finance costs and the planning, and making sure that you do have the funds available for that. Remembering a vehicle needs to be licensed every single year, so there's a license cost involved. And then two big things is a maintenance plan or a service plan for your vehicle. There are two different things. Making sure that you are planning that a vehicle needs to be serviced at least once a year, what the costs are for those different services, and that you can afford them if they are not part of your vehicle finance plan. Wear and tear, these are the things that will not be covered by a service plan. So this would be your tires, your wipers perhaps, etc. They could vary quite significantly in price. So just making sure again that you are aware of those costs and can afford them when they become due and payable. So the last point we want to discuss is the possibility of legal action and potentially even repossession of a vehicle. Under the National Credit Act, if you finance your vehicle through a credit facility, or anything through a credit facility for that matter, you have to obviously make your payments on time every single month, and the minimum payments that are due. And in terms of the National Credit Act, specifically Section 129, if you are in default, after 20 days, your credit provider will give you notice that you are in default and that they could potentially start legal action. It's very important to take note of this, because if that action is not corrected, they could proceed with the legal action. And in the case of a vehicle, obviously, this could lead all the way down to them obtaining a court order to repossess your vehicle at that point. And it's very important for us then at this point to remind consumers that the National Credit Act also does make provision for consumers who are over indebted and are struggling to repay their debt as well as cover their monthly living expenses, that they can seek help in the form of debt counseling. A debt counselor is there to assist you to make sure that you can afford your necessary living expenses, as well as protect your assets, in this case, for example, a vehicle, to prevent them from being repossessed. Your debt counselor is there to give you that legal protection, as well as restructure your debt into installments that you can afford by negotiating with your credit providers to repay your debt over an extended period of time. And finally, talking about repossession of vehicles, it's very important to remember that if a vehicle is repossessed, the credit provider will most likely sell the vehicle on auction or in some form, and if the amount that they sell the vehicle for is less than what you owe on that vehicle at that point, you will be liable for that shortfall amount, plus possibly additional costs and fees. So it's important to make sure that at all times your budget is set up in such a way that you can afford it, don't miss your payments, and if you need help, that you seek it as quickly as possible. So from what we can see, purchasing a vehicle is something that takes a lot of thought and planning, it takes budgeting, and it definitely takes understanding of what method is most suitable to your specific lifestyle. Vehicles are a very big temptation. Obviously, it's very nice to drive something that looks amazing and has everything that opens and closes and switches on all by itself. But it's important that we remember that it needs to fit not just our lifestyles, but also our specific budgets. So we hope that this has been of help to you in planning your purchase of your next vehicle, and that you know a bit more about your different options available and things to look out for and take into consideration when you are planning that next purchase. Thank you for joining us in this week's episode. We hope it's been of insight and adds some value. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and please leave us comments in the comment section below so that we know any topics that you'd like us to cover in the future.